इसको बना दो co-host.
Okay.
Hello.
Can anyone hear
Jeremy.
me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent.
Hello.
Can anyone? Oh, let's see. I can almost see myself here. There we go. Excellent.
Hello, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
Good, good.
Sorry about the delay. We had a few
No.
technical issues.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Okay, so shall I share my screen at some point? Is that?
So, are you planning to present the PPT or do you want us to do that?
I'll do it. I think it's easy if
Okay.
I control the timing.
Okay. Okay. Just give me 1 minute to introduce.
Okay. I'll just check.
So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Diksha, and I will be your host for this event. So we are excited to have you all here to learn about Fitzroy readers. Today, we will cover the readers 31 to 60. I want to give Jerry O'Carroll a warm welcome for coming today to share his knowledge with us. The event will follow the same instruction as before. We'll put everyone on mute except for our speakers to avoid any disruptions. We will disable the chat box. So please write down all your questions, and at the end, there will be 10 minutes questionnaire session, and then we'll enable chat for everyone. This session is being recorded as well, which will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So please stay until the end. As we all know, there is a 5-minute assessment that must be completed in order for you to obtain your certificates for this webinar. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker before we begin the program. Jeremy O'Carroll has been the Fitzroy Method Director of Training for the past 10 years and has trained teachers and parents in many countries around the world, including Australia, Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, India, Malaysia, and Thailand. He is the author of Fitzroy Reader 11x 20x, the Fitzroy Method Teacher Guide, and Full Speed, a novel about having the courage to live your dreams. He has also lectured and tutored at the University of Melbourne. So now, over to you, Jeremy.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. Can we perhaps get the slides going, and then I will begin with the presentation. I am presuming that most people, I'm hoping, attended last night.
Yeah.
Is that the case? Excellent. Yeah. Because Faye and Nick then should have given you a good introduction on the early readers. So the readers 1 through to 30.
Yes.
And so it's my job tonight then to look at the latter readers, the more advanced ones, and just in an hour, see what I can do to help you understand them better and to give you some tips for teaching them and for teaching some more advanced ideas that come with the latter readers. So if we can just have my, in fact, have you shared the screen with me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so let me get the presentation up then. And here we go. Okay, so is that all clear for everyone? You get to see a nice younger looking version of me there. If only I could say that youthful. Anyway.
Jeremy,
okay.
we are not able to see your screen.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a pity. So let me see. Maybe I need to accept something. Who can recording on? Have you asked to share the screen with me?
Just
share screen. Here we go. Okay, I think I've got it now. Okay, now it should work.
Yes.
Okay. And Okay, what I'll do though, is if we can just get rid of these. And let me get rid of that. Oops. I'm just wondering if I can, there we go. Okay, I think we can see it fairly well. No, I can't get rid of that anymore. There we go. Okay, so in today's presentation then, what I will do is I'll begin by just giving you a very quick, just for a few minutes, a recap on the Fitzroy method. And then I'll jump straight into the advanced readers and I will talk about how to teach them, the method behind them. And you'll see there's quite a bit of grammar in the higher levels. So I'll look at how to teach that. And then we will look at two very important components. One is creative writing and one is planning. So this could be planning for an essay on a particular topic. It could even be planning for a creative writing piece. And I'll give you some tips on how to do that most effectively, just simple things that you can teach your students to get much better results. So hopefully, since you've all been working with phonics, you'll realize that the key point about phonics is that it uses sound. Now, it's a fairly obvious point, but I think it's one that is worth reflecting on because not all languages use an alphabet. And in that means that not all languages really focus on sound. So if you look at a language like Chinese, there is no way that we can tell how a Chinese character is going to sound just by looking at it, or at least it's a lot more difficult. Whereas in English, we know that the alphabet is a kind of sound code. So if you have the letter A, it stands for the sound A, and so on. And then running the letters and the letter sounds together, then you can decode a word. So if you had the letters C-A-T, you can decode it K-A-T, and away you go. So the key here as teachers is that we have to realize that the first basic building block when we're teaching literacy with a phonics system is to teach the sounds the letters make. And what we find, and this is a very fascinating thing, is that if we do just 4 things, if we just teach 4 basic things, then students can actually read up to 95% of the English written language. And so these are our building blocks. These are the things we need to really focus on and ensure that our students have mastery of. So just to recap on these 4 things, the first thing students need to know is their basic letter sounds. And so when you're teaching, you need to ensure that you're not rushing this first stage. The students need to be very, very familiar with every letter and every sound it makes. And that's the first building block. Then you move on to something more advanced, which is the digraphs. So hopefully you'll remember from yesterday that digraphs are, well, technically a digraph is 2 letters put together to form a new sound. For instance, the letters C and H when put together might give us the sound ch. And that is a new sound. It's very different from the k and the h sound. It's a ch sound. It's a brand new sound. And in the Fitzroy program, what we do is we teach all the key digraphs in the English language. Now, we also technically, there are things called trigraphs. Trigraphs are 3 letters put together, and quadgraphs are 4 letters put together, like shun, for instance, T-I-O-N. So as you know from using our program, we first teach the basic letters, then bit by bit, incrementally, in very small steps, we start to teach the digraphs. Then we also have things like phonic rules. And a phonic rule might be something like this. You have a word like run, and you want to add ing onto the word run. Now, to add ing and get the sound running, you need to actually double the N, because if you didn't, it would actually produce a sound somewhat like ruining. And so you double the end, and that keeps the short vowel sound. Now, there's lots of different rules, but if we learn the rules, then that will help us spell accurately. And then the final component of these 4 pillars of the English language for literacy is the 50 most common special words. Now, special words are irregular words, so they're sight words. words like said. So they're high frequency words, said and was, these kinds of words. And if we learn the 50 most common ones together with the basic letter sounds, the digraphs, and the phonic rules, we can cover about 90 to 95% of the English language. In other words, we'll be able to decode or read that amount of English. Now, here's a fascinating thing. If you take just the top 25 words in the English language, that is the most frequent 25 words in English, they will actually constitute about 25% of everything you read. So if you open a random book, about a quarter of the words on the page will be one of these 25 words. These 25 words will make up about a quarter of all the words on any given page. Now you can see they're very simple words. These are not all sight words. They're just high frequency words. But it shows you that while English seems irregular, while it seems very difficult, if you can learn a few of the key kind of building blocks of English, then that will help you read quite a large percentage of English. And so this is what we want to do in the early readers. We want to go through all these high frequency words and we want to master them. So one of the takeaways I want to kind of impress upon you now is that it's better to take your time and be very thorough than speed ahead. It's a bit like the tortoise and the hare. The tortoise will win the race. Even if all you want to do is master literacy as quickly as possible, then it still will be worth it to take your time. So the temptation as teachers, when you're being pressured by parents, is to rush ahead. Often you want to be able to show to the parents that, you're at reader 35 or 40 or 50 or whatever it might be, and then the parents are impressed. But what you need to ensure is that before you move on to the next reader, the students have very thoroughly absorbed all the information in the previous one. Okay, so that is a very, very short summary of some of the key elements in the early readers, which hopefully Faye and Nick covered in actual detail. So let's move on now to the important part of this presentation, which is the advanced readers. And that's 31 to 60. And the great thing about the way the Fitzroy method is structured is that the method, the way we teach each reader level set actually stays the same. So if you understood how to teach readers 1 through to 10, then you just do exactly the same things for the high levels, for readers 31 to 40, 41 to 50, 51 to 60. So in that sense, the method stays the same. So it's very important when you're working with the readers that you go through a certain process. You don't just pick up the reader and get your students to read it. In fact, there are many things you need to do before reading the reader. Now, hopefully these were covered in some detail yesterday, but the key things fundamentally before you begin a new reader is that you need to do some preparatory work. And that fundamentally means you have to learn all of the new material in the reader before you actually start to read it. The reason for this is if you don't do that, then when your students get to the reader, there'll be many things they don't know. And that means that when they start to read, reading will seem very difficult to them. It'll be stop, start. They'll read a couple of words, then maybe they get to a word they don't know, they'll struggle with it. And reading will seem hard and they'll get discouraged. But if they learn the new material before they get to the reader, now this will take some time, but if they learn that new material, then when they get to the reader, they'll be able to read it through and decode and understand everything in the reader. And as a result, reading will seem a lot easier and they'll grow in confidence. Now, to reiterate, the key things that you must always learn before you start to read a reader are the new sounds, or in the very early readers, it could be new letters. So it could be later on, it might be some new digraphs like ch, etc., or sh. But in the first readers, like in reader 1, a fat cat, there are 13 letters being taught. So the students would need to learn those 13 letters. You also have special words. So you've got, and you'll find these on the back of every reader. So if you have a reader, you turn it to the back and you'll see there are new sounds and there are special words. So they're the first things you need to learn. And to learn them, you'll use the Fitzroy method workbooks. And so when you use those, you'll find that on the A sheets, you have the new sounds, and on the B sheets, you have the special words. And so it's important then that you actually go through those worksheets before you start the reader. And after you've gone through those worksheets, you'll do other things too. For instance, you might scan the reader for say the special words. What scanning means, it's not reading the reader. Scanning is simply looking through the reader to try to pick out those words. So you're just trying to find, for instance, the special words in the reader without reading it. Then what you want to do is you want to invent sentences with these special words in them. And so to do that, you'll get them both to maybe verbally do it, but more important, you'll get them to actually write down these sentences. And that will give them extra practice with, say, the special words. And if you would focusing on the new sounds or the digraphs, you get them to invent words using those digraphs and write sentences using words which use those digraphs. And so this will give them lots of practice with, say, the new sounds, the special words before they get to the reader, so that now when they start reading, they can read those words, the special words inside the reader. They can read words which have new digraphs and new sounds in them. Another thing you'll want to do, and this will be particularly important for the higher reader levels, in fact, it'll be essential, is you need, as a teacher, to go through the reader and pick out any vocabulary that you feel students might not know. And when we get to the higher levels, the language used is quite advanced, and there'll be terms and words they may not know. And so you want to make a list of any words you feel that students might not know. And then you want to help define these words and explain them to the students, and ideally get the students then to use these words in sentences, to make up sentences using the words so that they can demonstrate that they understand them. This leads us to a very important point. When we're teaching needs to be done in such a way that the students are active participants in the learning process. If we simply just talk to the students and there's no feedback, if they don't engage and think about the topic for themselves, then it's passive learning and they'll easily forget. But if we get them actively involved, if we make sure they invent sentences with the new words, if they invent sentences demonstrating an understanding of the meaning of new terms, then they'll remember these words, they'll remember these terms. But if we simply tell them the meaning of the word and leave it at that, then students will most likely forget the meaning of the word. So we always need to make learning a very active process where the students are involved in that. Okay, so that then is a key principle that we need to follow, and that is, before we start to teach any reader, we need to teach all the new material in it first. And in particular, that will be the new sounds and the special words, and also the meaning of any terms that students may be unfamiliar with. Now, here is some readers from 31 to 40. And this is actually from reader 35. And I've just got some workbook sheets, and I've got a page from one of the readers and the back page, and you'll see how it all fits together. So on the left of the screen, you see sheet 35A. And so we said A is teaching the new sounds. In this case, it's E as in head. Now note that the EA might, in other contexts, be pronounced E as in each. And so we need to say E as in head. And then if we look down at the actual text from reader 35, there are a couple of words that use this new sound. So I'll just give you a moment to just look at that text and see if you can find any words that use the E sound. So again, I want you, even though we've got the mics turned off, even though we've got the chat turned off at the moment, I still want you to engage and start to think. So look at that text and just see if you can find any words that use that sound we're teaching, the e as in head. Okay, now hopefully you found at least a couple. So we've got thread. So as Dolly walked away, the thread became longer and longer. And then on the next line down, the sleeve looked dreadful. So we had the word dreadful, and both thread and dreadful use that e sound. And you'll see that obviously in the readers, we're going to be using words that use that sound as often as we can. But the students will be able to read those words comfortably because even before they've got to the reader, they've done the A sheets, they've used, they've invented sentences with that new sound in it, invented words with that new sound in it, put them in sentences, written them, practiced them. So now it's very easy for them to read any word in the book that has that e sound. Here we've got our reader 59. So this is the second last of all the readers. And you'll see that it follows exactly the same principle. We've got, if you look at sheet 59B here, so B we said was for special words. And then if we look at reader 59, this is the back cover. You'll see we've got special words, official, collision, vaguely, knowledge, circumstances, etc. Well, those are the words which we practice on sheet 59B. So if you look through there, you'll see that we have those words and we're practicing them throughout the sheet. And then if you look to the right of the screen, you'll see we've got the actual page from the book. And you'll see that if you read through that, it's getting much, much more advanced, the actual text. But even with this reader, the method would stay the same. And so before you picked it up, before you read it, you go, okay, what is the new information in this reader? We've got one new sound with the as in one, spelt with an O. And we've got several special words there. And so we'd be learning them plus any terms, any terminology that the students would be unfamiliar with. Now, as you saw from the reader 59, and here we've got the reader 59 again, the back page, as we advance, as we go into the higher levels, the amount of special words grows. They become a little bit more complex. And so here we have to get strategic about teaching them. And whilst it was very easy in the early readers, because if you can remember in readers 11 through to 20, we never had more than one new sound being taught. And we didn't have too many special words. So everything was kept quite simple. We had one new sound. We had just a few, admittedly, they grew a little bit as we went along. We got more special words. But to begin with, in the early readers, we kept it fairly simple. But now, because students are becoming more fluent in reading, because they're becoming more confident, then it's possible to start to give them a slightly higher workload. But that said, we still need to break it down into kind of bite-sized units. So let's imagine we were teaching reader 59. We've got, let's see, 5, 7, 8 new words there. You probably wouldn't want to teach all of the 8 new special words in one go. So it could be a smart idea to break it down, say, into 4, 2 lots of 4, and teach them on different days. And so we only teach them a little bit on one day. And, you know, if we teach them 4 words, they can probably remember them without too many troubles. And then on another day, we teach them 4. Now, when we're teaching these special words, we actually have a particular way we go about it. And the way we go about it is we try to analyze these words. And that is we focus on the words and we try to break the words down into their component parts. And you find that if you do that, it becomes much easier for the children to spell them. Because the great thing about phonics is even if a word is in some way irregular, much of the word usually still follows regular patterns. And in fact, you'll find that a lot of these words we can break down into logical parts. So let me give you an example of that. I've actually, you won't have this on your slides, but I just built a few examples here for you. So let's say we've got the word champion, and champion really is basically regular, except that we've got the ch. Now in brackets, you see I've got a number. So that number means which reader taught that sound. So we taught the sound ch in reader 21. And so if we were teaching champion, you might write it on the whiteboard like I have, a ch, then a, p. Now the I, the it sound, admittedly, when we speak, it probably comes out a little bit more like an E, but if we said champion, it still makes sense. So for our purposes, it's basically phonic. So it kind of works. We really just needed to know the ch and we could decode it. But since you're on reader 59 and that came in reader 21, that should be fine. We've got the word collision. And so in collision, the k is normal, the o is normal. We've got the double L, we call them twins. And early on, hopefully the students have been taught that in English, when we have the double letter, it only makes one sound. And then we've got the shun. Technically, it's a quadgraph. So remember, a quadgraph is four letters put together to produce a new sound. And that we actually teach in reader 50. Now, a good way to familiarize yourself with where all of these new digraphs, trigraph, quadgraphs are being taught is in the Fitzroy method master list. You'll find this master list, which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. And if I go back one, you'll see here's the master list for some of the earlier readers. You'll find that in the teacher's guide. So I'm hoping that everyone here can at least get access to a copy of the teacher's guide. And what you want to do actually is get a copy of this Fitzroy method master list, because that way you can go through and see how the entire program fits together. You'll see in the right-hand column, you'll see we've got the special words being taught. And in the middle column, we've got the new sounds and generally the digraphs which we are teaching. Okay, so let's look at a word like echoed. Echoed is a more advanced word. It has many different sounds. And this really shows us why it's important that you don't rush through the program. Imagine you've been rushing through the program because you got excited and you wanted to impress the parents. And so you sped through them, but you didn't do it thoroughly. So then they get to read it, say 59, they come across a word like echoed. Suddenly it's very difficult because maybe they can't remember the ch digraph or the O. For instance, if you look on the master list over here, down on reader 57, where it says excavations, you see we've got that O as in obey. Okay, so ek, so we have the CH here actually is taught as a k in reader 60. So in reader 21, we taught CH was ch. We taught that first because it's most common. And then in reader 60, we teach the k. We haven't taught them that yet, so it's a special word, but later on, next reader, we'll teach them that sound. But even here, we can still mention it. We can still teach them that the k, the CH here can make a k sound. We don't mind whether they can't remember it because we know we're going to be teaching it the next reader, but we make a start. Then they should know the O and they know the d. The d on the end of a word, we taught in reader 25. So here, there's only one new sound, the k as in echo, that the student doesn't know because they've already learnt the O as in obey and the d as in say barked. And so then it's not that hard to read the word. And by breaking it down into its different sounds, then that gets the students to really focus on it and it will help them remember it. So it'll be much easier for them to do it. So when you are going through special words, I recommend breaking it down like I have there. And as a result, students will find those words much easier to remember. Now, if you're wanting to teach the different digraphs, you can also use the alphabetics game. Now, we've actually come up with a new version, so it might look slightly different, but you can see here we've got some cards which are consonant cards, some cards which are vowel cards, some cards which are digraph cards. And the aim of the game, like Scrabble, is to form words. So this is a really good way for children to have fun, but gain practice forming words and using the digraphs. So if you can, I recommend getting a hold of the alphabetics game because it's a really fun way to teach the new sounds. So here's just an example of some more advanced digraphs being used, like shun as in nation or us as in famous. Okay, so let's now look a little bit at the advanced readers. I'm hoping that many of you have taught these readers. And if you have, you'll see that the vocabulary being used does get quite advanced. But the good news is that if you finish Reader 60, then you should be able to go on and read general literature without too many problems. For instance, students at our school will go on and they'll read, say, the Harry Potter series, and they'll find that fairly simple after reading, our readers. And so it will take you to a fairly high level of literacy. But again, when you look at these readers, it's important to note that if you rushed, then they would be very difficult because there'd be too much new information in each reader. But if you are thorough, then as you go through, you'll be able to decode it because you've learnt all of the more challenging things. So in this reader here on the left, the new sound being taught is the n as in KN, as in knob. So there's the word knob then, or the word no. And so that often comes up. Let's go on to another page here. If we look over to the right-hand page, you'll see we're in the 50s. That's getting more complicated now, more advanced. We've got words like advertisement, fabulous, brightened. These are much more advanced words. But even so, most of these, like even if we had a word like brightened, we have the I as in IGH, we've been teaching, and the D, remember we said we taught that in Reader 26. So everything else apart from the IGH and the D on the end is regular. But since they've already learnt those sounds, they shouldn't have any problems decoding a word like brightened. But if they hadn't learnt them thoroughly, then they would get to a word like that and they will struggle. Again, important to take your time. Now, if we look here in Readers 51 to 60, look at the left page, page 2, and you'll see that there are some more advanced words like integrity, truthfulness, perseverance, commitment, and somewhere here, if you look on page 3, there's the word conscientious. And so these are words which, at least some of these words, you may need to teach them before you read the reader. Again, you don't want to get to a reader and you don't want it to be incomprehensible to the students because they don't understand the vocabulary being used. So teach that first, and then when they get to the reader, it'll be relatively easy to go through it. The same here. This is the final reader, this one, Reader 60. This is where, remember we taught the K as in echo. So here we've got the word chasm in the middle of the page there, chasm, and the name, say, Nicholas. So these are examples. We use them as many times as we can of that new sound being taught. And again, in our system, we always teach the easiest thing first, the most common thing first. So ch was taught in 21, and here the k, which is less common, is taught in Reader 60. Now, here we've got the workbooks, what we call the word skills, and they are critical. So I'm hoping that everyone has been using these rigorously, but if not, you need to start to do that. The whole program is really built around two kind of pillars. We've got the readers and we've got the word skills or the workbooks, and you need both. If you just go through the readers, students may be able to read well, but they will struggle to write well. They'll struggle to write accurately. Also, they will struggle with their grammar. So in these workbooks, then we really focus on written ability, we focus on comprehension, understanding, and we focus on grammar. So here's an example of grammar And you'll note that we always teach grammar the same as we teach the new words, etc., where we go from easiest to hardest. And so here we've got some rules on nouns. So if you look at the left-hand page, you'll see we've got the name of the thing is a noun, the name of a person is a noun, the name of a place is a noun. So we've got a few different rules for what nouns might be. And that's from reader 32. So you see it's sheet 32D. So that 32D means it's connected to reader 32. Then we've got sheet 55C. And so that's near the end, that's more advanced. And here we're looking at other types of nouns, in particular proper nouns, and we give a whole set of rules for them. So that's more advanced. So that comes in later. And then we give students practice. So again, it's critical that students work through every worksheet before going on to the next reader. So here we've got, say, 55. That means it's there to do with reader 55. So before you go on to reader 66, you need to do all of the worksheets, which are numbered 55 plus some letter. So you need to do them all before you move on. That's critical, so they have a thorough. Another thing we do in these advanced sheets is we look at a kind of a more advanced form of comprehension. And this is critical because it's not enough for students just to be able to read a book. They need to be able to understand it. We want them to be able to think about it and really comprehend all the different shades, all the different meanings and ideas in the text. And so that's why we have this section. You can see there's subjects for discussion, where we want the students to really start to think about the story and to think about its meaning. Then we have lots of different written exercises to extend their language skills. And later on, you also see idioms, so different expressions in English that we use. And these will be particularly useful in places like India, where some of these expressions may not be so common. So it's going to enrich the actual language skills. Here are just some examples of students' work. So they're answering some of these things. Notice that generally in Australia, once they get to about, say, depends on the school, but often 7, 8, maybe 9, they start to write in cursive, or what you can sometimes call copperplate English. So that's what they've done here. Over the page, you'll see if we go back here, down the bottom section, it says practical English, design and draw a poster urging people to do something that is good for the environment. So here we're just wanting to give children practice at a whole lot of different things. So here, this is just a young child wrote an example on stopping car pollution. So like make electric cars, ride bikes. Note that it doesn't have to be like the most perfected piece. We just want to get them doing things. We want to get them in the habit of working with English in different ways. So it doesn't have to be, gallery quality here. Just get them working on things. Here's another example of a poster, this one for saving water. And it's got a whole lot of different little facts, like toilets take 7 liters to flush, your body 75% water, etc. Over here, then, we've also got different types of written expression. And one thing we'll get students to do is we'll get them to start to write different stories. And in a bit, I'll look at some creative writing tips. But for the moment, here we've got one key point I want to sort of emphasize is we want to really encourage students to be very creative. And so it's easy as teachers just to get them to repeat to us what we tell them. But really, we want them to start to think as much for themselves. And it's interesting, if we look at the actual word education, it comes from a Latin word educare, which means to draw or lead out. And so the idea there is that we're not, as teachers, so much trying to just fill students with knowledge. We're trying to bring out the students' innate skills and abilities. We're wanting to kind of cultivate them. Excuse me. Excuse me. So we want to bring out their innate skills. Okay. So really try to encourage creativity as you're working with your students. Okay, now let's have a quick look at creative writing. There are some basic tips which we can give to improve creative writing. And it's good just to get the technique right from the beginning. So one way we can really improve what students write is by getting them to incorporate all of the 5 senses. So normally when students write, it will be very sight oriented. They'll describe what they, what the characters see. And this is good as far as it goes, but when we only use one sense, it's like we're teaching in mono. Imagine you're listening to a radio and it's in mono as opposed to stereo. Well, once you start to incorporate all 5 senses, then it becomes stereo and it becomes much richer. Now, we don't have a lot of time, but as an exercise, I want you to look at the text in front of you from the rescue. Maybe it's small for you, but if you look at the screen, you'll see people were dashing out of the shopping center. We'll read through it. And what I want you to make note of is any moment where you feel the description is particularly good, where you feel as a reader that it becomes more vivid to you. So not necessarily what your mind says, oh, that's nice writing. I want you to think, oh, which part of it makes me really live the scene more fully. So people were dashing out of the shopping center from the crackling fire. Screams were coming from everywhere. I was running as fast as I could. Then I realized I forgot my mum, who was in a wheelchair. I left her in the IKEA shop. I sped through the crowd to the shop. When I got there, I saw things falling from everywhere. Then a big chunk of ceiling fell right in front of the door. I yelled out, help, help. I realized I didn't have much time. So I panicked. So I picked up a rock and threw it at the glass window. The glass shattered everywhere, but there was a hole just big enough for me to get through. I climbed through the glass. My hands were stinging like mad, but I went on looking for her. Now, this isn't exactly the world's greatest story, but I chose it because there are a few moments where the writing is more vivid. It is more powerful. So for me, if you look at just the first line, the word crackling, it stands out. And notice that's not sight. Okay, that's sound. But that is a lot more vivid than a lot of the other things in this story. If we go through it again, we'll see that after throwing the rock at the window, it says, my hands were stinging like mad. And I think as a reader, you can really feel that. So again, now it's the sense of touch, which we feel. Later on down in the story, it says, I could hear someone calling my, let's see. Yeah, I heard the squeaking sound of my mum's wheelchair. Notice squeaking again, that really comes to life. And so get your students to practice making up sentences using the different senses. So you get them to do that in isolation. And then when they go to write their story, what you want to do is you want them to practice using the different senses. I have a few examples here. So if we had, here we're looking at sense of smell, and I just made up these examples. So if we use no smell, we might say something like the kitchen was messy. Then if we added some smell, the messy kitchen stunk of lemon detergent and vinegar. Another example, I walked into the cafe, and then walking into the cafe, I breathed in the thick aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Now here, we've actually, that's sort of level 1. If we want to make it even better, we try to make things what I call active. So general might be the room smelled. Better is to write something specific. The room smelled of lavender. Because if we just say the room smelled, we don't know what it smelled of, but lavender, we can actually start to imagine that. And then the final thing is what I call specific and active. The aroma of lavender wafted through the room. Now, if you read that sentence, then you can really immerse yourself in the room, and you really can you almost feel yourself inhaling the lavender as it wafts through the room. We've got sense of hearing. So we go no sound. So we say the city was beautiful. Then with sound, bells chimed in the beautiful city. If we drop down to the bottom example where I've got the 3 levels, we go general, the sound coming out of the room was deafening. Now we want to be more specific. The sound of the bass drum coming out of the room was deafening. So that's good. We're more specific there. But now if we want to really feel it, if we really want to feel that bass drum, we make it specific and active. So we say the boom of the bass drum thudded out of the room. Okay, so you can look through the other examples on the other senses. Another key thing when we're writing is we want things to be concrete rather than vague. Often when students write, they'll use words like nice or good. And these are very, what I call fuzzy words. You can't really feel or see these words or experience them. They're too vague. So when you write, you want to be concrete. So if we flip over, we've got a list of words here, and we see there's always 2 of them. Now, I want you to look at these words, and I want you to, if you've got the slides and you can circle them, just circle the word which you feel is more concrete. If you're just looking at the slide, then simply in your mind, pick one of the 2 of the pairs, one of each pair, and ask yourself which one is more concrete. So if we look at the first pair, we've got man and priest. Now imagine you're trying to visualize this. Visualize the word man. Now visualize the word priest. Which one is more visual? Okay, the word priest is. What about flower and rose? Okay, visualize flower. Now visualize rose. You see, when we're more concrete, it becomes more vivid. We can actually see it. And if I say animal or I say rabbit, well, you can see a rabbit. It's hard to see an animal. And so again, you want to give your students things like lists like this so they really begin to appreciate the need to be specific. Here's an example of a vague sentence I came up with. So the car swerved around the corner, sped past the building, then crashed into a large vehicle. Okay, now we make it more concrete. The Porsche swerved around the corner, sped past a McDonald's, then crashed into a tractor. Okay, now which of the 2 sentences can you see most? Which one really brings that fictional world to life? Clearly the concrete one does. So again, what you're going to do is this. You'll get your students to write a creative story. They will probably many times start off with something vague, like the car swerved around the corner, sped past the building, then crashed into a large vehicle. What you then need to do is to get them to rework it a little bit. Highlight certain things, certain words, like the word building or the word vehicle, and say, okay, can you be more specific there? Maybe it's a skyscraper, maybe it's a taxi. So get them to then substitute vague words with concrete words. No, they don't have to do this for every sentence, or else it might sound a bit like a supermarket list, but just every now and again, substitute the vague, or even more often, the vague with the concrete. And suddenly, just by doing that one simple thing, their creative writing will really come to life. Now here, it's hard to see here, but it's on dialogue. Now, just very quickly, because I know we started a little bit late, so we're running out of time, but a few things to think about when we're writing dialogue. Now, the first basic point is that dialogue needs to sound natural. And so the issue we often have when writing dialogue is our language is overly formal, because when we write, let's say we write an essay on something, we're taught to write it formally. We won't say, he wasn't there. We might write was not. So we won't abbreviate things, for instance. But dialogue, it needs to sound natural. So often when you're working with your students, get them to ask themselves, would someone really say what this character just said? Does that sound natural? And oftentimes I'll go, oh, actually, no, that doesn't sound very natural. No one would really speak like that. And so just get them to then rework it so that it does sound natural. So that's a key point. And just that one simple point will improve dialogue a whole lot. Okay. Again, here, where we've got different parts of speech, again, it's critical to be precise and concrete, specific with your terms. So let's just have a quick look at the different parts of speech here. So if we were using verbs, for instance, we could say he walked with long steps across the room. But if we say walked with long steps, that's a bit clumsy. It's much better to use a stronger verb. We could say he strode across the room. So we're always looking for a better, more precise verb when we write. So the other example I've got there is he moved speedily across the room, but we could have just written that as he dashed across the room. So wherever possible, we're using a more precise verb, and we have to watch out for adverbs. So in those sentences, he moved speedily across the room, the adverb is speedily. And so most of the time, if we use a verb with an adverb, it simply means that we haven't picked the best verb. And you'll find most of the time, if you use a better verb, then you'll be able to just get rid of the adverb entirely. And now, same with nouns. More often, you can use a more precise noun, and then you don't need the adjective. So for instance, you could say a big house, but maybe you just need the one word mansion, and that already means big house. Or it could be here, I've got fast car. You might just write Porsche or Lamborghini, and they're a fast car. So you use a better noun, and then you don't need the adjective. Okay, now looking at the workbooks, you see we've got different turns of phrase. So if you get your students to go through all of these worksheets, then it will really improve their English, because they'll learn different ways to say the same things, different expressions. So that's what we're doing with turns of phrase. For word families are a little bit like digraphs. The difference between a word family and a digraph is that digraphs are used many times over. And so they're very common, like the digraph ch, we'll see it time and time again in many, many different words, whereas word families usually aren't used in too many different words. They're used a bit, and so it's useful still to learn the kind of the pattern. For instance, here we've got the sound uff. So like rough, tough, enough. So that's a word family. But because there aren't too many uff words in English, then we just call it a word family, and we don't call it like a digraph. So they're sort of like a special case. But because they're important, we also teach those. So it's in addition to the digraphs, the trigraphs and quadgraphs, we teach word families. So it's very thorough, our system. Okay, now quickly here on punctuation, you can do a basic thing. If you're getting children to punctuate, one very simple tip is simply get them to read out their work. And if they read out their work out loud, then generally they'll be able to punctuate most of it correctly. I'm not saying in the entire amount, but a lot of it they'll be able to punctuate correctly just by listening to the way they read. If they listen, they'll know where to put the commas. If they listen to how they read, they'll know where to put the full stops. If they listen to how they read, they should know whether it's a question, and they should know sometimes if they even should use an exclamation mark. Now, we try not to encourage them to use too many exclamation marks, but still by reading out loud, children will be able to punctuate a lot of their work correctly just by doing that one simple thing. Okay, so here you've got different punctuation sheets, revision. Notice here's 56A. So this is right near the end of the workbooks. And here we've got the I as in kind. That's the new sound being taught. So it's the same. The A sheets, remember we said were the new sounds. So even in read it 56, it's still following the same template. A sheets equals new sounds. So nothing changes as we said at the beginning. Now, because the grammar is a little bit more complex, like if you've looked at readers 51 to 60, you'll actually note that there are two workbooks for that reader level. So we've got a workbook, the word skills book for readers 51 to 55, and then one for 56 to 60. And the grammar is a bit more advanced, and there might even be some grammar that you have not done for a while and are a bit rusty on, even as a teacher. And that's why the answer books are very helpful. So if you haven't got copies of those, they're not so necessary for the early readers, but definitely for the upper levels. Certainly from 5 and 6, you want to have the answer books on hand, and that will make your life easier. Okay, now we did start a little late. I was considering looking at the art of planning. I don't think we're going to have time now. So maybe just for the very end, if you've got some questions, I will stop sharing my screen.
No, Jeremy, we have 10 more minutes, so you can continue. We have 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay, well, I'll give you the 10 then, and we'll just quickly look at the art of planning then. Okay, so when we're planning, it could be an essay, it could be a short story. It's very important for students to be aware of just a few basic things. One is that all the parts need to go together. So I say it's a little bit like a building. You know, you build one part, you put down the foundation, then you put the next level on top of that, and then the next level and the next level, and they all kind of have to work together. So what you sometimes find very often actually, when children write stories, is that it's a little bit random what they put in. They'll put in one idea, and then they'll put in another idea that isn't really related to the topic. Then they'll maybe put an idea that is related to the topic. Then they'll put another one that isn't so tightly related to the topic, and everything's a bit everywhere. So one basic tip is to get students to think from the end. So if they're thinking from the end, maybe it's an argumentative piece and they have to debate for a certain point of view on some topic. And so you need to ask them, well, what are you trying to prove in this particular essay? So once they know what they're trying to prove, then every single thing they put into that essay needs to somehow help them get to the end point. It's almost like a road sign leading to the end point. And so if there's anything in the essay that doesn't help them get to that end point, the point they're trying to prove, then they need to actually get rid of it. It doesn't matter how exciting it is. You find that kids sometimes they get really excited by something which is fascinating. And maybe the point really is fascinating, but if it doesn't support their argument, if it doesn't support their case, then it can't be in the actual essay. And so always get them to think from the end. What are they trying to prove? Where are they trying to go? And if they know that, then just get them to ensure that every point they make helps take them to the final destination they have in mind. So just do that and you'll find that it'll get rid of a lot of the silly points, the silly ideas that enter into children's essays. Now, a great way to actually plan essays is with mind maps. So hopefully mind maps are not a new concept to you, but if they are, then it's almost exciting because it's a new world to explore. And here's a basic mind map I actually did on a computer. And this one is a mind map on the Fitzroy method. And so you see mind maps it's almost like a tree structure, like branches, and then they use words and illustrations. So if we look at this one, it's sort of a way really with a mind map. It does a few things. One, it engages both hemispheres of the brain. And so normally when we're doing a lot of academic things, we're very much in the left logical brain. So the left side of the brain, language tends to be left brain, mathematics is left brain. So we tend to be stuck in just one hemisphere. Now, the best kind of thinking happens when we use what's called whole brain thinking, where we use both hemispheres of the brain. And so that's what mind maps do. By using images, by using pictures, by using color, that engages the right hemisphere of the brain. We've got words already, so they use the left brain. So now we're suddenly activating both parts of the brain. That creates superior thinking. The other thing a mind map does is it enables us to put all of our ideas on a single page. And what that helps us do is see how everything connects, how everything is tied together. Now, to do mind maps, we'll find that there's a certain structure, there's a certain way we can do it. Here's an example from a book of just a mind map, which is very colorful, very nicely done. But now let me show you, and I've even got it through a kind of a mind map here. Let me show you some of the things to focus on when we're building a mind map. So I've got a mind map showing us how to use mind maps. And so let's imagine this is a mind map for essays. Okay, so the first thing I've got there, that is just a word. What are we trying to prove? So I've just got the word prove plus question mark. When we're doing a mind map, we try to use single words wherever possible. We don't really want to write a whole sentence. The idea is if we wrote a whole sentence, it's very hard to kind of get an overall view of all of our ideas at one glance. Whereas if we just use some images, if we use just a single word, then we can very quickly understand all the key concepts we want to talk about. So the word or the image is just a trigger. It just triggers in our memory what we're thinking about, what we're talking about. So when I say prove question mark, that means what are we trying to prove? Remember, we said we work from the end, get students to go, okay, what is the end point they're trying to get to? What are they trying to prove? In this case, maybe it's an argumentative essay. And so you might have a single word there, what we're trying to prove. Then I've got a brain. So that's for me is like a mind or a brain. And then the next image is like a storm. So here I'm going brainstorming. So the idea is the very first thing we get students to do when they're working on a topic is to brainstorm ideas. So they're just trying to think of all the things they can think of to do with that topic. They're not trying to put them together in any coherent manner. They're not trying to be logical. They're just going, let's grab every idea we can think of and pop it on the page. So that's kind of like stage one there. So we go, what are we trying to prove? And then all the ideas we can think of to help prove that point, then we just jot them down. Then what we do, you see, I've got the word threads there. We're trying to then find commonalities in these ideas. And these commonalities will then form what I call categories. And so I remember once there was a topic, maybe it's even from the workbooks, about going to Mars. And, is it a good thing to go to Mars? Would you want to go to Mars? And so you might say, oh, going to Mars, well, what's good about it? Good is, it's adventurous. You can go on a rocket ship. You could see a new planet, different things. But what might be some problems? Well, there mightn't be much food there. It could be really cold. It's maybe like a big desert. It's dangerous. And so you're getting all of these different ideas, and then you're trying to bring them together into categories. So it could be like one category might be it's exciting. So you list everything to do with it being exciting. Then maybe there could be a category it's boring. And that's, you're stuck in a desert. You don't have the normal computers, or you couldn't play cricket or whatever it might be. Then you might, one category might be it's dangerous. Well, if you're going to Mars, a lot could go wrong, and there's probably many, many ways you could die. And so you'd list all under the category, dangerous, you'd list all the things which might be dangerous there. And the idea then is you might find that once you've looked over your brainstorming and all the ideas you came up with, there might be like 4 or 5 main themes. The themes are what I call categories. So then what you'll do is you will do a mind map, and you might have, say, 4 or 5 branches. And the first branch, each one is a category. So it's like a theme, and you write the name of the theme, like boring, dangerous, exciting, whatever it might be. And then you take from your initial bit of brainstorming all the ideas you had, and you put them in the appropriate category. So you move them to the category that best fits it. So if you had ideas like, the rocket might blow up, then that will go into the category of dangerous. If you've got something like exciting, you might, talk about, say, climbing a mountain on Mars or something like that. Then to create a proper mind map, remember we said that we wanted it to incorporate and kind of to harness the powers of both left and right hemisphere. Then we need to do things principally that engage the right hemisphere of the brain. We said already when we work with language, we're using the left hemisphere, but now we need to bring in the right hemisphere for whole brain thinking. And to do that, we're going to use images. We're going to use color. And then we're also going to emphasize certain things. So for instance, if you have a point which is just more important than other points, you might write it in bold, or you might write in all capital letters, or you might use a bigger font. So that's important. And that way it can really stand out. So when you just visually glance at the mind map, certain things are going to pop. Certain things are going to really come to the forefront of your mind, and they're the key ideas, which is what you want. So that's why at just a very quick glance, you'll immediately see what are the most important ideas you'll be discussing in the essay. You see, I've got some under best ideas. I've got numbers. And one thing that's important, when you're writing an essay is that it follows a logical sequence. One paragraph leads logically into the next paragraph, which leads logically into the next paragraph. And so when you have a mind map, often you might need to move it. So if we've got different categories, you might go, well, what's most important? Let's say you're arguing that ultimately you wouldn't want to go to Mars. So you might, if you wanted to be really fair about it, you might say, look, there are some good things about Mars. And that could be the first thing you list, the good things about going to Mars. But then you will build to the crescendo of all the problems. So then like the dangerous things about Mars, then maybe things which are boring about going to Mars. And you'll then be able to logically put them in the best order. And sometimes to help you sort of see what the correct order is you can number them. So normally on a mind map, you're actually going to move in a clockwise motion. So you'll start at say 12 o'clock, and then you move to 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. So the first point would actually be, what are you trying to prove? The next one would be brainstorming, etc. But you could also, if you want to number them. So this could be 1 next to prove. Brainstorming could be 2. And then we've got the maps. That's where we're taking all of our different threads and building a bigger mind map. And that could be number 3, etc. And we go around. Here I've got, see, a key and the word. So that says what we want to do when we're using the mind map is we just use keywords. Remember I said we don't use sentences. And here we've got different colors, different font, etc. So they're just some of the things to think about when creating a mind map. And really, I think you'll find when kids enjoy it because they're using the whole brain. And if you start to incorporate mind maps into the learning process, so before they're going to write an essay, before they're going to write a creative story, get them actually to make a plan of it with a mind map to begin with. And this simple thing will just immediately, it will dramatically improve the quality of what they write. Okay, so that then was fairly fast. We had an hour, but hopefully you got some ideas which you'll be able to go and take back into the classroom. And yeah, if we've got a few questions now, then yeah, let me know. I will see if I can stop sharing my screen, or maybe you stop me sharing the screen. I'm not sure how that happens. Are you able to?
No, Jeremy, you had to go to this link and you say view options, and then you say stop participant sharing.
Sorry, whereabouts is that?
So you are being, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's good.
it happened. I didn't even do anything. That was easy. Okay.
So I did it for you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Jeremy. Jeremy, like creative writing is again a very vast topic. Do you
Yes.
advise any mnemonic or some suggestion for the children to remember the sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Any mnemonic you have devised, something like that?
Not really. Like I don't want it to become too mechanical. We want them still to be quite creative. Really, the key, to be honest, when you're teaching creative writing, is not to try to overload them. So, if say a student does a piece, well, first thing to note is that the key is always in the revision. One of the biggest issues with schools, and it's always been like this, is you write a creative piece, and what the teacher typically does is writes a few comments at the bottom which aren't very helpful. They're like, oh, good work, you've really done well here. And that doesn't help, right? I mean, it's nice to have a positive comment, but then we need to put some things, some constructive ideas. And so we don't want to overload the student, however. So at first, let's say we're working on the 5 senses. So you might just underline just a couple of parts in the story where the student could use more than just the sense of sight. And you get them to practice that. And so for this essay, all you do, they rework it. So all the learning's in the reworking, and just get them to alter a few of those visuals, or maybe just include a few more different senses. And then next time, maybe when they write something, that get them to do that, but then also get them to be a little bit more concrete. Sometimes they're using vague words. We want them to use more specific words. And so it's just going, okay, here are some different ideas we've got, like our teacher's toolkit of things that could improve the story. And then little bit by little bit, each time getting them to work on something, you know, one point, and then the next time another point. And then just hopefully if we keep doing this, and it'll take a while, it's not a super speedy process, but over time, they'll start to do things automatically without thinking. Their writing will start to include more concrete description without you needing to kind of ask them and tell them to do it. And so I'd say the key more is just to do it bit by bit, and then it will become natural for them. Then they won't even need to have necessarily a list, but you know, you could make up, I guess, some sort of mnemonic, just getting them to remember the 5 senses as well.
So I have an interesting question, like how do you measure and track student progress within the program, within the Fitzroy method?
Well, I mean, the most basic one then is clearly with the the reader level, obviously. In the teacher's guide, we've got some different tests. So really, you know, as they're going through the program, it's very important that you're constantly testing them. So before students go on to the next reader level, they need to be tested on the material in that reader. So if they're on reader 31, they need to be tested thoroughly on the information in reader 31. So what will that be? We've got new sounds being taught. So never go on to reader 32 until we've tested them on all the new sounds from reader 31. We want to test them on all the special words from reader 31. Then, and here's a very important tip, which is often forgotten. Always get them to practice some dictation. So in our readers, what we'll do is before they move on to say reader 32, get 2 pages from reader 31, dictate the pages and get the students to write it down. And then you'll see how well they really know the material. You know, it's easy to read the words, but it's much harder to write them. And so if we get them to, if we dictate, then we'll find that we can much better assess where they're at. And we won't then rush on to reader 32 unless they're actually ready for it.
So what about the fuzzy words in which we can feel, we can touch with our senses? Then what about those words?
For those fuzzy words, what you want to do is, firstly, when a student writes those fuzzy words, circle them. You know, again, you don't want to overwhelm a student by correcting 4 million things in a story. Okay, so choose your days. One day you work on this, another day you work on this. But let's imagine that you're wanting to work on those fuzzy words. Then just circle them and just get the student to say, okay, ask the student, okay, is there another word you can use, a more precise word, a word that really makes me feel or see what's going on? Because if they just give a fuzzy word, you can't. You have no idea really what's going on. But if they make it more specific, if they make it more concrete, then of course you can feel it, you can be part of the scene. Now you might, as a teacher, need to give them some examples, but then they'll soon get the drift. Even if you use something like my list, you know, earlier tonight I showed you a list of pairs of words, and one was concrete, one was kind of fuzzy. And you can then, you know, give them lists like that and get them to practice pointing out which one. You know, later on too, you know, if it gets more advanced in writing, you might have something like, you know, the student might say he was sad or she was sad. And sad is okay, but if we showed sadness, that would be a lot stronger. So if you showed, for instance, the girl crying, then we can see that the girl is sad without even being told. That's a higher level. But again, that is being more concrete, more specific. And so it's just going in little steps, giving them plenty of examples so they can see what's the fuzzy word, what's the concrete word, and then just circling a few of them in their stories and getting them to substitute what they've got with something more specific, more concrete, more vivid.
Though this is not the audience question, this is my personal question,
Yep.
which I had seen personally. So you had aversive readers. So the children who doesn't want to read at all, they are in
Okay.
grade 4 or grade 5.
Yep.
And how to get them back? How to make them
Yeah, but the
reading?
reason in like 5% of occasions they don't want to read is because they feel insecure about their reading. If they were competent at reading, if they were good readers, they would want to read. So almost always, I mean, correct me if this isn't the case here, but pretty well always I've found that it's simply a question of confidence.
Yeah,
Students will-
it's true, and it's
Yeah.
apply for the maths as well. Like
Yeah.
once you had an aversion or you find it difficult, you try to evade from that particular situation.
Yeah, and then it gets worse because
Yeah,
then
and how
because
to
you
bring
evade-
back that child because he find it difficult initially. So according to
Yeah.
you, how you find?
Well, you have to kind of go back to basics, but you also have to do it mindfully. So the reason they struggle is because they either didn't learn the initial building blocks. Remember we said in our system, you got the 4 key building blocks. You got the sounds, you got the special words, you've got the rules, and you've got the most common sight words or special words. So basically, if they're struggling, it's because those building blocks, they haven't learnt them properly. So you need to kind of go back. But if you just say, obviously you wouldn't do this, but I mean, imagine if you said, well, you're not very good at reading, so now you need to go back to reader 1, a fat cat. If you did that, they wouldn't feel very good about themselves. But you can do it in other ways. And you can, even if you get them to go back, you say, okay, now we're going to see how fast we can go through these. You're already a pretty good reader. Let's move through them. Or you can just take the basic building blocks. For instance, if you look at the master list, you can see the basic building blocks, at least for the new sounds and the special words. And so you can take those and just start to get the student to practice those new sounds, practice those special words. And that will help them a lot. And so again, it's really just going back to the basics. The problem happens because the student didn't learn the basics. And the problem happens also because teachers are often tempted to rush ahead. But when you rush ahead, it's good for a while, but then you tend to hit a wall, then you crash, and then the student loses confidence, and then they start to resist, and then they don't want to learn, and then you have all sorts of problems. So much better to be very thorough. Before you move on to the next reader, then make sure that they know all the content of that reader first before moving on. And yeah, as I say, if it's too late, they've already gone on, then you have to kind of go back and in one way or the other teach them the basic building blocks that they should have learned by the time they're up to whatever reader level they are on.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's been very late for you as well in Melbourne, and it's late for us as well. It's pretty late in the evening. It's almost 6 o'clock. Thank you for your time. And for the rest of the people, Akita just shared the quiz, which is you need to attempt for the certificate, requesting you to do the quiz, and the certificates will be awarded to the people who will complete the quiz. Thank you. So, Jeremy, we had designed your quiz on this concrete word and fuzzy words only.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So, thank you. And it's good night. It's too late for you. So let the audience finish. It's like 10, 15 minutes of the job.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me
Thank you.
tonight.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Jeremy.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Akita, over to you, please.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi everyone, let's start the reflection process for today. I've shared the links on the chat for the quiz for today. Please click on any one of the links. All the links lead you to the same quiz. Also, please note that you will receive the certificates for today's workshop only if you complete the quiz. Please send a message on chat in case of any problems and we will assist you. Once you finish the quiz, you can exit the meeting. Thank you. I've sent the links on chat. Kindly check.